Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's New in Historical Fiction, a regular panel series that features historical novelists with new and upcoming titles. I'm really excited to have our panelists here today, and I'm really glad to have you as an audience, and we're really appreciative of the interest you're showing in what we do at History Through Fiction here and in these novelists' new books. I'll just give you a very brief introduction. My name is Colin Mustful. I'm the founder and editor of History Through Fiction, an independent press that publishes historical novels that are rooted in well-researched, compelling stories. On Zoom here, I've made it so that you will not be able to unmute yourselves. You can turn your camera on or off if you like. You can interact with us in the chat, so go ahead and just say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from, maybe what you're reading right now. I also put together a landing page with all of our panelists' books in case you're unfamiliar with some of those books. So I'm going to post that in the chat right now, and I'll probably post it again later. If you go there, you can read the synopsis for each book, and it also takes you to the bookshop.org where you can purchase the book. And we support bookshop.org because they support independent booksellers by giving a portion of the sales back to the booksellers. I also want to say thank you to anyone who made a small contribution to the event. This is a free event, but we do accept donations, and I really appreciate that because that helps offset the costs of the Zoom platform and the Eventbrite platform. So thank you so much for that. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to move myself off screen and then I'll have our panelists introduce themselves. So let's start with Monica. Monica is the author of The Jewel of the Blues. If you could say hello and let us know about your novel.
Fabulous. Hello, everyone. And Colin, thank you so much for inviting me. Um, the Jewel of the Blues, it takes you to the wild and raucous 1920s. It's a story about Lucille Arnetta Love. She's a fictional character, but she's a woman who's solely focused on becoming a singing sensation, a Broadway star. In vaudeville. The story starts, however, in the 1906, and there's an event that happens with Lucille's father that takes her and her family away from the sundown town of Evansville, Indiana, on a trek through the South. It is there when Lucille is about 5 years old that her parents find that she has a talent. She has a big singing voice and a penchant to perform. So while they're traveling down south, escaping this incident that occurred, they decide to become a singing group called the Traveling Loves. And they go from church to tent revival all throughout the South. And Lucille becomes known as the little girl with the big voice. And they perform for a number of years. And a manager discovers them or discovers Lucille because he feels he can make her a star worthy of top billing. And he convinces her father to take her to the respectable, venues to work the circuit. When they find the respectable venues don't pan out, they come up with another plan. Now enters Big Bobby on the saxophone, Sweet Mitchell on the piano, and Lincoln on the cornet. And they form what's called Miss Lucille's Black Troubadours. And they are hot, hot jazz, hot blues, that big sound that matches Lucille's voice. Now, as they're becoming famous, little demons start getting in the way, and the troupe starts getting into big trouble. Drinking, gambling, romancing, you name it. Can they get from one theater to the next to reach their dreams? Well, there's more because an incident that occurred back in 1906 rears its ugly head and kind of threatens their fame as well. So there's a lot of adventure. There's romance. There's coming of age in the storyline. Do they reach for that golden, brass ring? Um, they do. Do they get there? You have to read the story to find out. But the story shows our Lucille Arnetta Love come full circle from a young girl who dreams about Broadway to a woman who learns how to command the stage and command her own life.
Thank you, Monica. That sounds very interesting and a very good pitch. I don't know if you practice that, but yeah, you're a natural. Next, let's have Susan say hello and author of Strange Beast. If you could say hello and let us know about your novel.
Hi, I'm obviously Susan J. Morris, author of Strange Beasts, which just came out October 15th in the US and October 17th in the UK. Strange Beasts is a gothic historical fantasy with puzzle box mystery. It is set during, oh, it's set in the worlds of Dracula and Sherlock Holmes. And so it's set during the Belle Epoque in Paris, which is, of course, the Edwardian era in England. But it's also set in these two literary worlds that I'm drawing from and kind of combining. Um, and that is all I had plans to say. I can talk about kind of like what it's about more if you would like, or I could just pass it on.
Well, we'll definitely get into that. I have a lot of questions
Awesome.
to learn more about all the different elements in your novel. So we will definitely get to that. Next, Adriana, if you could say hello and let us know about your novel.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm the author of The Sunflower House, which actually just debuted yesterday. Very exciting for me. I know. It takes place in Nazi Germany, so it's definitely a serious story. And it tells a story that is not often told. My main character, Alina, after losing everybody she loves, she's forced to work in a Lebensborn home called Hochland Home. And the whole purpose of these homes were to breed the master race. We can get into that a little bit later in terms of how that was handled. But while she's at the home, she needs to hide her Jewish identity to survive because it is not known. And when she recognizes that the children are being neglected and they're suffering, she decides that in addition to trying to save herself, she wants to save the children too. So in a lot of ways, this story is about forgiveness and hope in the middle of a very, very dark period in history.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think just another piece of World War II history that's more and more stories are coming out all the time, and it's just fascinating that those things actually happen. So I look
Yeah.
forward to learning more. And for those who have attended What's New in Historical Fiction before, usually we have four authors, and today is no different because Ashley and Danielle represent A.D. Rhine. I don't know how you guys want to handle this, but if you could say hello and let us know about your new novel.
Hello, everyone. We're so happy to be here speaking with you all. I'm Danielle, and in the down bottom corner is Ashley Giveaway. We are both authors, and we are also, so together we are A.D. Rhine, and we are also friends that have known each other for over 25 years. We met on a U.S. military base in Germany at the age of 15, and both became authors and knew we wanted to write together. And it took the pandemic to really launched that we had been planning for a long time, and here we are. And Ashley will tell you a little bit more about Horses of Fire and Daughters of Bronze.
Yes, yeah. So our novels are Horses of Fire, which came out last year, and Daughters of Bronze, which comes out November 26th. And it's an epic duology of the Trojan War told from the perspective of four Trojan women. So Andromache, Helen of Troy, Rhea, and Cassandra. And it's rooted in the fascinating but lesser known history of the late Bronze Age and told from the perspective of the vanquished instead of the victors. And we really, we love the mythology, but we really wanted to try to give a realistic portrayal of the Trojan War, and really focus on the fascinating human actors, and try to show that, the women trapped behind the walls of Troy still had agency. And while we have all of the moments from the myth that people know, we also have, some surprises where the women are acting behind the scenes to impact those major events.
Yeah, definitely a great new perspective, new way to look at that historical event. Well, let's go back to Monica. Monica, my first question when looking at this novel is how to bring to life vaudeville. First of all, you're writing, you have to write sound. So how do you bring that sound to life? And then also when I think of the era, I think of this kind of grainy, faster, sped up footage with no sound. So tell me about how you were able to bring that to life on the page.
Yeah, that was a challenge. And I know when I was writing, and as I do with everything I write, I need a soundtrack. I need something to listen to focus on. So as I was writing, I was listening to a little bit of Jelly Roll Morton and some ragtime and Scott Joplin and you know the sun was coming in the window, and as I was listening to the music I started bouncing around, and I'm okay, this is some happy music. And I started moving a little bit more, and then I'm like, how can I put that feeling on the page, because it made me feel free and happy. So my thought was to really focus on not just the historical content, but the emotional content. How did it feel to be a performer on stage, with a hot piano riff going on where you can feel it all the way down to the floorboards? Or, how does it feel to be in that audience? Like during the 20s, it's an interesting time where it was sandwiched between World War I and the Great Depression, and it was a bit of wildness in between. Everybody had a little bit more money than they had before because, there was, manufacturing jobs that were out there. I mean, it was rough. Life was rough, but still, they had a little bit more money, so they wanted to spend it on entertainment. And there were folks in the audience who loved to hear that sound, that trombone sliding back and forth, and those sly little songs that were out there that were pretty wicked, yeah, music, the blues and jazz at that time. So I focused on just trying to capture the emotion of the performers and folks in the audience who, needed that release from the day to day. So listened to a lot of music, read a lot of lyrics, embedded into my book, some little vignettes of songs here and there, just to, give the reader some idea of the type of music, the tone, the pattern. Also looked at the fashion that of that time, which were just, to me, they were phenomenal. And tried to imagine the feel of those fashions on the skin in terms of the beading, how the bead felt against your skin as you were wearing, how the feathers would feel on your face when you were performing, how the furs at that time would feel around your neck. And so just focusing on the sensational aspect of how music makes you feel, how entertainment makes you feel from both sides of the fence. And I tried to capture that as much as possible.
I'm curious, did you find yourself envying any of your characters because they got to live through that?
Oh, yes. I mean, once I was writing, I was like, oh, I want to be there. Although, that's kind of like, just the real fantasy of it. I want to be there when there's no more trouble and there's nothing going on. I mean, I want to be there when I don't have to worry about running from the police or, thinking about my life and where, but I want to be there and wear those clothes and listen to the music and just order the forbidden drinks and cocktails and stuff like that and live that easy breezy life.
I guess we'll have to read the novel to do that.
Oh, absolutely.
Susan, let's have you talk a little more in depth about your novel. Now, you have a lot of really interesting elements here. It's called part historical fantasy, part puzzle box mystery. Dracula and Sherlock Holmes collide. Tell us a little bit more about what that means and how you conjured up all of that.
So, This actually started with a short story that I wrote that combined the legend of H.H. Holmes, America's first serial killer, Bluebeard of Chicago. Turns out he probably didn't have a murder hotel filled with murder chutes and like small rooms. It was probably just insurance fraud, but it's a fascinating story that was all over the newspapers. Combine that with Bluebeard and thinking about the nature of soft power versus hard power and how women use soft power often to survive in a world where you can't use hard power. And there, my two main characters, Hel and Sam, just leapt onto the page. And Sam, of course, is she's the daughter of Mina Harker of Dracula. And Dracula, I really wanted to bring in because it deals with monsters, of course, of a monstrous variety, but also deals with the idea of the new woman and what that means in terms of like what it means to be kind of a woman. And then there's also Hel, who is the daughter of Professor Moriarty, which is Sherlock's arch nemesis, which deals with human monsters and also brings in kind of that puzzle element. As part of this, I knew I really wanted to explore the theme of feminine rage. Also, it's kind of an awakening and realizing that this soft power and everything, it comes kind of from a place of trauma where you're having to come at things sideways, because if you came at things directly, you could never actually get anything done, right? You're in a very patriarchal society in 1903. And when I think of feminine rage, I think of werewolves, because it's such a great metaphor. My favorite thing about monsters is when they're metaphors. And werewolves, of course, make me think of France, because France has this rich history with werewolves. It had the Beast of Gévaudan, which was featured in Brotherhood of the Wolf, but which is this fascinating story of where you have this, it was in, I think, 1764 to like 1767. The King of France even got involved because he was all sore after the 7 Years' War and he lost. And so he needed to regain his honor and the idea that God liked them. And so he sent like his best hunter down to kill this beast that was killing women and children on the outskirts of rural France. And it killed over 100 people. And his hunter like killed a giant beast. He declared mission accomplished. The beast kept killing, and someone put it down with a silver bullet, starting the werewolf rumors. And so I used that kind of as the architecture of my book. And so you have these threads from Dracula, Sherlock Holmes. I have a beast also, though mine kills only rich, politically important men, which is kind of an acquired taste. And then I have the puzzle box mystery of trying to solve that. So I wanted to try and be actually pretty historically accurate, but also all the lore of that period is true. So there was a Beast of Gévaudan or Gévaudan, and it wasn't a lion or a striped hyena or a dog in a costume. It was a werewolf, right? And so everything that people believed was real.
That all sounds just so intriguing that you're able to weave all those things together and so relevant. I think that's one of the values of what all of you write is the relevance of history to today. So I think that's great. Adriana, let's talk a little bit about the history in your novel, which, like I said, I didn't know anything about. So tell us, what is the Hochland Home and the Lebensborn program of Nazi Germany?
Yeah, thanks. The program itself was a solution to a problem for Heinrich Himmler because he was charged for ensuring the 1,000-year rule. And in order to do that, you needed to have enough boys and girls, enough people. Germany's population or their birth rate had been in decline for years. And so from research, what we believe is that these started out as homes for girls in trouble, right? Young teens who were pregnant. Germany was a very conservatively cultured, it was a conservative culture. So it was a place where these girls could go, get the best medical care, get the best food, be treated very well. And they could have their babies, and then they would give their babies up for adoption to good Nazi families, right? Who would then indoctrinate them into Nazism. So if you look at what was produced at the time by the Nazis, it all seemed fine. I mean, it makes your stomach sink now, but it was considered a decent program. That wasn't the case. There's a lot more going on that made it even worse. What they started doing at a very early age with these kids is they would indoctrinate them into the concept of biological marriage. And they did it through youth groups. the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls which that was the predominant youth group of the time. And what they would tell the girls is there aren't enough boys to go around. You may not be a wife, but you can always be a mother for your Führer. So they were telling these kids to have sex with a sacred purpose, which is to breed children for the Reich. And so there are many reports of girls that had multiple children with different boys and sometimes with SS officers. But for the most part, they did it willingly. They thought it was their duty to do this. And girls were treated like brood mares. The obedience was necessary. So these homes were set up at first to take care of these young people having babies. And the treatment of the children was neglectful at best. Because when you think about it, after you have a baby, if you're not going to keep your baby, you're not going to bond with it, right? You may feed it, but you're not going to want to bond with it because you know you have to give it up. And the ratio of nurses to children was totally off. So these children were treated like inventory. They weren't touched. They weren't held the way they needed to. As many as 40% of them were what we would call failure to thrive children or had severe developmental difficulties. And some of them had to be sent away to other facilities and were eventually killed. The ones that didn't survive, the ones that didn't do well. So it was tragic in a number of different ways when you think about it. You know, treating the women, these girls like broodmares, treating the children like inventory. But I also need to say that in the context of what happened during the Holocaust, this would be considered a lesser evil story, right? Because nothing can compare to the murder of 6 million Jews and millions of other people. So that's got to be said. But I still thought it was an important story to tell and something that isn't well known.
Yeah, very startling, very tragic and I mean, even difficult here to talk about. Can you
Very.
elaborate a little bit on, well, first, how you discovered this history and then how you're able to plod through the research despite how tragic it was?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of an interesting way because I stumbled across the story. What happened was the origins of this story came in 2 dreams about 25 years ago. I was a high school teacher on summer break. I didn't get a job that summer to make extra money, so I just was dabbling in fan fiction and short stories. And I woke up from a dream crying. It was not about the Lebensborn program. It was about a mother-daughter relationship that needed healing, family secrets, and a box with a swastika that was found in her closet, in the mother's closet. So when those ideas wouldn't go away and I couldn't stop returning to those chapters, I thought I needed to find something, a story to tell. So I started looking on the internet and I just stumbled across an article on Hockenholm, and I'd never, it's like the hair on your arms raise, and I thought that's my story. So then Colin and I started researching. I found a lot of books, mostly from Europe, that had to be sent over. There wasn't that much here in the United States. A lot of used books for sure. I moved to the New York metro area, which put me real close to the U.S. Holocaust Museum in DC. And that's where I found resources that I couldn't find anywhere else. What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry, Colin. How did I get through?
Just the heaviness of reading that material and continuing to get through it because of your mission to finally tell the story.
Yeah, it was really hard. And there were periods of depression where I had to pull away and maybe work on something else. But that voice in my head that came with those first 2 chapters that I wrote just kept nagging at me. The other thing is to research this, you kind of have to immerse yourself in everything about Nazi Germany at that time, which is really, really dark. But there are a lot of stories of people who helped. And that's what I think kind of inspired me. And, Alina is the hero of the story, and she actually strives to help these children. So I think, Colin, what got me through were the stories of the survivors and the stories of people who helped. Because everybody has a choice. That's like one of the themes in this novel. You've got a choice on, even if you're really, really stuck, you've got a choice to help somebody or hurt somebody. And, if you help someone, your soul is preserved. If you hurt someone, you destroy yourself. So those kinds of stories are what kept me going.
Yes, and that those good choices are now inspiring people years on, so that's great.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to Ashley and Danielle. Your novel is set a couple millennia before any of these other three novels. What was that research like? How do you bring that ancient period to life?
So so when you're talking about ancient history or even prehistory, there's obviously there are, some difficulties in the fact that we have very few sources, and the ones that we do have tend to be, pretty one-sided. We get a lot from the ancient Greeks, we get a lot, from the Romans, but when you read Herodotus, he has a distinct point of view, and there are people that he thinks are, great, and there are people that he thinks are barbarians, and everything is filtered through that lens. And thank goodness that we have that, because we would not know a lot of these things without it. We wouldn't even know where to look for answers to questions that we didn't even have before we were, made aware of these things. But the problem is we're always getting only part of the truth. And for us, the thing that's also fascinating about ancient history is that people are really just peopling. So times change, technologies change, cultures, language, even norms. And there are people that will disagree with this, but from my perspective, human beings remain the same. And there are things that we can look at in the past. And as soon as we think that we are not capable of either the greatness or the atrocity, that's when we have a problem. So for us, looking at the Iliad in particular, it was amazing to us. And maybe this is because we grew up in the military community as soldiers' daughters, but this is, the warrior's epic. It's the ultimate warrior story. And we were shocked once you get past the this person. I get a lot of people are like, oh, the Iliad, it's this person killed this person this way and this person died, and long list of this, but there's so much more to it than that. And reading it, we were struck by how relevant and how real it felt to us. Anybody who has read the Iliad and has read the goodbye scene between Andromache, Hector's wife, as she's standing there and there's a servant holding their baby and he's going off to the front lines. If you're a military spouse, I said goodbye to my husband 10 days after our wedding. He was in Afghanistan, or, having lived that scene as a child, saying goodbye to their parent, or as a spouse, it could have been written yesterday. The emotions are all the same, they're all real. And so when we looked at that, we knew the thing that we could bring to this was a way to kind of highlight or to shine a light in the parts of the story that we thought had been left unexplored, like the places where our lives would have been, where our mother's lives would have been. And we knew that we could, and we hope that we can bring it to life in a way that would really resonate with modern audiences. And so that's what we tried to do. And it's really interesting too, because as far as the difficulty in bringing this to life and in trying to root it more in the history, we have very little information about some of the people that were actually in Anatolia at that time. So who the Trojans might actually have been. We didn't even know the Hittites, which was the reigning, the biggest empire at the time, that they existed until 1906. So the Greeks, we've known about the Greeks for so long, but there are so many fascinating people who had cultures, languages, and it really actually were probably the source of so many of these innovations that we, now attribute to others. Like they were there, and we really wanted to, with this story, kind of bring them to life to the best of our ability. And it entailed chasing down a lot of very obscure sources and really wading through a lot of different types of resources until we got to what we felt like we needed to write this the way that we wanted to.
Yeah, it's about those emotional truths, it sounds like, and it sounds like you were able to do that. Ashley, do you have anything to add on your thoughts of, I mean, had you done this before with any of your previous work, or was this the first kind of stab at ancient history?
I think this was the first time we went back this far. Yeah, but Danielle nailed it. I'll take the next question, but yeah, she pretty much, yeah, she summed it up really nicely.
Well, let's go back to Monica. Monica, I'm curious how you were able to balance some of the craft elements of history and fiction, because you have some drama going on in your story, some secrets that come out, but in between all that, you have all this real rich history, real historical figures. So talk about how you were able to combine your research with those dramatic elements.
Well, it's almost like I couldn't separate the two. It's because the purpose of the book was just not to just to present a soapy story that happens in a very, interesting time. But I wanted to highlight, what it was like for African Americans at that time that pursued their arts, that had to travel through Jim Crow South, that had to be subjected to, particularly if you were in vaudeville, had to be subjected to the demand to be corked up or perform in blackface so that you would, present somewhat of a plantation review. And of course, you didn't want to, but that was the demands of the business. So I wanted to be able to present those type of things. So I focus on the business of vaudeville, about the contracts, the compensation for that, how to work around those demands of being in one venue and the next venue and having to take, how do you get there? Because, transportation wasn't always accessible for, African Americans. You didn't get paid that much. So if you could take a train from one to the next, you would get there and you wouldn't have any place to live because you didn't have any money, I wanted to highlight the, disparity of, the performers along the circuit. I focus on the theater owners booking um, association circuit and talk a little bit about that, which was, there was an acronym for it, was called TOBA, which the blues singer Ma Rainey said really meant tough on black. That's what that meant because of the disparities of, if you were a performer on vaudeville, of, trying to find housing, having, even though you might have made it to be a headliner, you still had to come into the theater in the back door. You can only perform in certain areas, the desegregated theaters. So all of that, which was the times, is incorporated in the story because my characters are moving. They're moving constantly from the time they leave Indiana. My main family leaves Indiana through working on the vaudeville circuit. They are, intersecting with other people who are moving as well, because we're getting into the beginning of what they call the Great Migration, where, over the course of time, there were 6 million African Americans left the rural South to go to cities and, to find work and jobs. So there was a lot of movement. And so I use that movement and intersections to have the conversations, to talk about some of the practices in other cities, to talk about the news of the day, some of the atrocities or race riots that might have occurred in Chicago, that the destruction of Black Wall Street, all of those come into the story via conversation, because that's what people talked about. That's what impacted their lives. So the historical facts and data are all embedded in their interaction, the characters' interactions with others, or as they float through the business of vaudeville as well. I also take, time within the storyline to bring in the entertainers, actual entertainers themselves. Like, for example, Lucille's mom is a unfulfilled opera singer. So there's conversation in her telling her backstory about how she learned about Cicely Rita Jones, who was an opera singer, an African-American opera singer who was the first to sing at Carnegie Hall and sang for the president. So we tell Cicely Rita's story, through Lucille's mother. So there's several ways to kind of embed what the history of what was going on at that time into our storyline as well, because in fact it kind of headlines the story, because those are the challenges that the troupe faces as they go from town to town and try to survive, and get to, again, that brass ring as well. So we put it in conversation and interactions and just people who pass through to talk about different individuals so that the history is embedded in it. And I thought that was a better way to go than just give a dissertation about, okay, in 1900 such and such, this is what happened. History is part of the story. So my hope is that people will read the book and go, that name sounds familiar. Let me go Google. Let me go find another book. So I'm dropping the seed of African American history that could be erased.
Well, and YouTube is such a great place for some of those songs, some of those sounds. I'm reading a novel set in 1915, and I find myself when I see the title of the song, I have to go look it up and listen to it. So that's kind of an interactive experience. But I applaud you just for your craft. What you just described really shows all the work that goes into putting a historical novel together and all the things that need to be considered. I think that's wonderful.
Well, thank you. And also, just to add to it, in the book, also there are information about the actual theaters that were open along the circuit and little, bits of information about those theaters, who performed there and the like. And there's a little map of the where the Miss Lucille and her Black Troubadours played. So, and those are actual theaters and actual occurrences. And even the contract that she signed to be on the circuit is kind of taken from a real actual contract as well.
That's great. Let's go back to Susan. This is kind of a selfish question. I'm an editor, and it seems like you have a lot of editing background, book reviewing background. What was it like for you to step away from your editor, take off your editor hat and put on your writer hat? What were some of kind of the advantages of having that experiences and maybe some disadvantages to it?
Yeah, so there were definitely both. So I was an editor for the Forgotten Realms, which is a fantasy line at Wizards of the Coast. It's novels. And so these are shared world, which means that everyone is writing in the shared world. So it's like historical, except people made it all up. And so we have this giant library filled with every book ever written in this area. And whenever anyone did anything, like if they described a place as smelling like something, you have to go look it up and see like what did other people say about it. So I actually had a lot of experience doing research and having to just, what I found is I didn't keep facts in my head. I kept like where I could find information in my head. It's like, oh, I know exactly where to look for that. And so like I had this index. And so we had that aspect, which actually made kind of the research aspect easier. And then the other thing is that because it's shared world, there is a feel for the Forgotten Realms that authors need to capture. And there could be an author who's brilliant, but they can't capture that feel. And so they couldn't write in that world. And I would say in historical, it's always, I think, interesting or difficult when you're writing about a different culture. In France, I'm not French. My main character is American in Strange Beasts, but I'm obviously not French. But I really wanted to try and capture the feel of being in France in 1903, and I wanted to capture the dream that France had of itself, because we have, at the time and now, all these stereotypes about what France is like. And then also the French people have their view of what everything's like. And so I think you really want to kind of capture that. And that's something that like getting the feel for what the vibes, I guess, are of a place, like what the dream a place has for itself, I think was really useful from the editorial background. And then, of course, also, I think editing really teaches you to think in terms of pivoting. So you see the novel in terms of trajectories, you see all the threads. And so it's easier when you have a little time away to see what's not working, why it's not working, how things fit together, and where you can pivot to make it work if it's not working. Now, the hardest thing about going from editing to writing is literally that, because there's like, so I just found out this is actually true. There's like research to support this, but I've always felt like you have like kind of an analytical side and a creative side, and you need both in writing and you need both in editing. But editing is using those critical faculties. And I feel like I've been working on these critical faculties and these analytical abilities for so long. And of course, there's a creative analysis aspect to it. But when you go to write, you want to be in a creative space. If you're in that hypercritical space, it's going to be really hard to write. Or if you manage to get a few words, it's going to feel kind of soulless and weird, like empty. And so and I found out that apparently You have a focus, we have a task-oriented mode and then standard mode. And so what I'm actually had experienced was that in editing, I'm in like a task-oriented mode, a focus mode, which is for getting things, done. It's very good for analysis, but you want to be in standard mode when you're writing because standard mode's where we're creative. And that's why when you go to like load the dishwasher, your brain suddenly explodes with activity because like you've stopped trying so hard. You've stopped sitting down and being like, I'm going to write now. And like your brain is actually going into that right place. And so I found that for a long time, I really couldn't edit and write on the same day because when I was editing, I'd be in this super critical analytical place. And so you start writing, of course, there are things wrong with it. I don't need to think about those yet, right? I need to be actually thinking about the story and getting it the feel right. But like, it's like you have all these whiskers that are pointing out everything that's wrong if you don't like shut that part of your brain off. And yeah, it's good to know if something's going to send you completely off to left field, but you don't need to listen to it if it's something minor, like a word choice, until later.
Oh, that was much more scientific than I was expecting, but yeah, very informative. I'm glad I asked. Adriana, when you last spoke, you were talking about the hope that your main character brought you, the inspiration. So let's talk a little bit more about Alina. Was this a real historical figure? Was she a composite of some of the people that you came across? Who was she, and what does she do in your narrative?
Yeah, it's interesting, Colin, because I've been analyzing my own process lately. I've done it more now than I ever have before. I'm a pantser, both in plot development and in character development. So Alina came to me even before I knew what the Lebensborn program was. And she just came to me, like dropped into my head, what she looked like, the way she presented herself, her anger, her fear. They all just came kind of intact on a conscious level. On an unconscious level, what I discovered about a year and a half ago, once we sold the manuscript and I started working with my editor, is that a lot of Alina is based on my mother. So Alina's compassion, Alina's strength, are very much based on my mom, who came over on a boat from Italy. She unfortunately had quite a bit of violence in her childhood. She was a young widow. She had a lot of things to overcome, but she was very strong and extremely compassionate. And she had a love of her children and all children. One of the things she always said is, "It's not my child, but it's somebody's child. Someone needs to take care of this child." And that is definitely one of Alina's, I think, strengths, her compassion and her strength. So on a conscious level, it just dropped into my head. On an unconscious level, I think even writing this novel, I was working through issues from my childhood and my relationship with my mother and the secrets in her past. So I know that's not a very structured answer, but I don't think I'm a very structured writer. I'm definitely a pantser, Colin.
So she was very real, kind of visceral for you. Or are you a writer where the characters are speaking to you?
Yeah, this talks a little bit about my process, which is going to sound a little bit crazy, but I've finally come to terms with it, I guess. For me, music is very important in my process. So it's really interesting to hear you say that in the beginning, Monica. All of my characters have their heart songs that are kind of like their emotional structure. So I wake up at 3 a.m. I don't know what I'm going to write or which character I'm going to write, but I kind of feel in my body after a while, after the first cup of coffee, who I'm going to write. I put on their songs, walk to their songs for 20 or 30 minutes, and then sit down and let it go. So at its best, it feels like dictation. Or like the next day you go back and you don't even remember part of what you've written. I'm sure it's happened to everybody here. And for a long time, I thought it was nuts, right? But that's just the process. So I don't know if that answers your question, Colin. I'm still analyzing my own process.
Yeah, I mean, each writer has their own process, and I think that's really interesting that you're able to put yourself in that headspace to do that. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I've got plenty of questions left for our panelists, but I do want to invite some questions from the audience. So at this time, if you do have any questions for our panelists, go ahead and post those in the chat, and I will get to as many as I can. I'm also going to repost that landing page. If any of these novels strike you now as like, I have to have this, go to that landing page and you can buy it from bookshop.org. Before I get to questions from the audience, let me ask one more question of our dual authors here. I want to ask you about writing battle scenes because this is set during a war, and battle scenes can be very challenging to not over dramatize, I guess. I'll let you talk a little bit about it. How did you meet the challenge of describing battle scenes for your readers?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it comes from what we grew up enjoying, what we love to read. So we grew up kind of in the golden age of, I guess you could say, like epic military history films, the Saving Private Ryans and the Bravehearts. That was like our adolescent movie-going experiences, but we read a lot of military fiction. I mean, Danielle, we both love Stephen Pressfield. Danielle's a huge Joe Abercrombie fan, so kind of going in the military fantasy space. Bernard Cornwell. So we definitely brought in just those literary influences. Danielle, do you want to talk a little bit about international relations and how that impacted you?
Yeah, so we like my background, my undergrad and grad degrees are in international relations, spent a lot of time talking about military technology, going deep into the weeds. And so, I mean, yeah, we were fascinated by how these things would have actually been fought at the time. And we wanted to bring like some gritty realism to it, but we also, being huge fans of military fiction, we also understand that for us, the thing that's most important is that the reader can see it like it's a movie playing out, and it's less about the describing every aspect of what's happening and like the weapons. And even though we tried the best we can to have those things there and for them to be right, but we want the reader to be caught up in the emotion of what is happening, to be able to see it and to feel like they're there or they're watching it from a bird's eye view. And so that when we're writing battle scenes, that is always the goal, is to put the reader in the scene, like they can feel it happening. And our favorite writers who do this, some of the ones who do it the best, that's how, by some strange alchemy, that's what they managed to do. And I'll also say that we do have a lot of people that were willing to read over our shoulder that we can brainstorm, be like, how would this actually work on the ground? And we are lucky that we have a plethora of veterans and others that will chime in, and we consult the experts and
Tell you when you're very wrong.
Yes,
So, yeah.
yes, which we're good with. We like that.
Yeah.
We're like, would this actually work? Like, no, and we come at it a different way. But yeah, and the other thing is, like, we wanted to write a war story that was piloted by women. And the thing that was the most important to us is showing that women did not just sit behind the walls. They never have. It's a very modern idea that women just are in this, like in many parts of the world, from the Eurasian steppe to the African continent, like women have been warriors for a long time. And not just warriors, but they've been participating in the wars that are fought around them. And we wanted to really bring that to the fore. And so that we really wanted this to feel like a war story where women were the primary actors. Not the only actors, but to focus on them.
And not necessarily the ones fighting, but you're viewing these battle scenes through their eyes.
Well, I think that's very interesting because you both have military backgrounds, but even then you still need an expert's help. And that's another element of historical fiction. All of us we can't get it all right. It's very challenging with all the different things going on. We've got several questions now from our audience. I'm going to start with Crystal's in case, in our little pre-meeting, all of you were talking about the release of your novels are coming out. You have so much going on, but most authors, when they're releasing one novel, they're working on another one. Do any of you want to talk about what you're working on right now? Go ahead, Adriana.
Yeah, sure. I'm working on a trilogy that I'm hoping to sell, and it's not historical. There are historical aspects, but it's based on La Strega, which are Italian witches, 3 generations of Italian witches. And they're witches, so they're horrible. What they're doing is horrible. But in a way, it's exploring the same themes as themes in the Sunflower House, except from the monster's point of view. So if this witch decides that what she's doing is wrong and she's trying to redeem herself, is she lovable? What is her identity? What can she do to atone? So I have found that to be interesting to explore it predominantly from the monster's point of view.
I can neither confirm nor deny that I have another book in the works, but I've been working on a historical fantasy that hopefully you'll get to hear about soon. And it's set in Ireland, and it's been really fascinating doing research there. There's this amazing podcast called Blerny Beladish, which is Folklore Fragments. It's done by the Dublin Folklore Institute. And I don't know if you've ever done research through them, but they have all these original sources online that you can go through. They've all been digitized. Some of them are in Irish. I can't read those, but the rest are all in English. And it's great because they actually had this amazing program where they had kids go home and get stories from their parents in the early 1900s and write them down so that we have all these old stories of Ireland at that time.
What was it called again, the podcast?
So the English name is Folklore Fragments, but it's under Blerny Beladish. I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. It's from the Dublin Folklore Institute. If you look at it on Spotify or pretty much anywhere, you can find it. It's really great. It's a fantastic resource.
That's awesome. Oh, well, I've
And
got a question. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Go ahead.
Oh, I've got a question from Reese. I think this applies to all of you about, we wouldn't write about some of this history if nothing happened. Obviously, there are things that happen, a lot of them very tragic. How do you focus, well, as he writes, how do you keep your story from feeling depressing while authentically showing how hard it might have been to live in such a period? Monica.
I think so.
Go ahead, Ashley. Go ahead.
I was just going to say something Adriana has mentioned a few times is this idea of choices. And I think that's something Danielle and I talk about all the time, that is probably when you look at history and you look at especially very tragic events in history, the stories that stick with you, or when you encounter people in real situations, real stories where they went against the tide, or they somehow managed to make a different choice than maybe a lot of other people were making. And that is always just so incredibly inspiring because it seems so unlikely. And I think that is something we definitely latch on to, is this idea of, okay, in this really dark moments, who are the people who do something different, do something that is maybe seen as crazy, and exploring that, kind of keeps you from despair and helps you find hope in those dark moments of history.
I just want to add to that is that, I mean, we can just look at history where, we have seen women just pull through, just take us from that dark times into a new period, into almost a Renaissance period, and where we change and move and groove. I mean, my intention as a writer is to always focus on to showcase the resiliency and tenacity of women. So no matter what is going on, and the horrible that's going on, that's impacting life as we know it, a woman will find a solution. A woman will find a way not only to bring herself through, but her family and her children, and to bring us into a new world. So concentrate. I mean, yes, there's things to write about, there's the challenges, but I think where the story comes in is how we resolve this issue and move forward. And we as women do the darn thing. So that's the way I look at it. There's a way out of it, and that's what we celebrate.
I love that. It sounds like a good bumper sticker for you. Well, I want to wrap things up here. We're coming up against the end of the hour. This has been a fantastic panel. It's gone way too fast. Oh, there's so much more to talk about. First of all, I want to thank our panelists. This has been so much fun. Congratulations on your novels. I know it takes years and years of dedicated hard work. So congratulations on where you're at and where you're going. I want to thank everyone who attended. We couldn't do this if we didn't have an audience, so thank you so much. I want to encourage everyone again to check out these panelists' books. Even if you don't have any room on your TBR, or if you don't have any more room in your wallet, at least just let your librarians know to pick up these books. Let your friends know to pick up these books. Post about them on social media. Anything you can do helps these authors. I do want to end with one question, and that is, why historical fiction? What's the value here? Monica touched on it a little bit about she didn't want to write just a historical tome. She wanted to bring this to life and tackle all those historical elements in a way that is maybe palatable. I don't know. So I want to ask each of you, why did you write this as a historical novel? What is the value of doing that? Susan, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I had kind of two reasons. One of which is that I had actually prior been writing secondary world fantasy, and I realized that the joy I get out of world building, I don't get the joy out of creating new cultures from scratch and everything. The joy I get from world building is bringing a place to life. And so that's one of the reasons. And then the other reason is that thematically, I really wanted to look at kind of like what it means to be a woman, a mother, a daughter, a sister, like all these things, identity of womanhood. And I found that like a time where this was really being, it's always changing, always being looked at, but like in the early 1900s, that was really a time when that was being discussed. And so I thought that would be a really good time to explore it. And also exactly what Monica and Ashley were saying about the fact that it's not about what you can't do, it's about how you do it anyway as a woman.
Thank you, Susan. Adriana, what's the value of historical fiction?
Make sure that these things don't happen again. So one of my goals was, if you can put yourself in the shoes of all the characters, and there are a bunch of characters, and think, what would I have done? If even a small part of you says, maybe I wouldn't have helped. I might not have made things worse, but I would have stood back. Then we know we can never let it happen again. We can't get to that point where these types of horrible, horrible things happen again. So that's my answer.
Yeah, definitely. Ashley, Danielle, why historical fiction?
I can start. I feel like historical fiction, there's still so much left. I would say this honestly about history as well, which really, I mean, I think about history as just stories that we're telling ourselves, because at the end of the day, it's an arrangement of facts presented by a person in a specific way, and it does not mean that it is the truth. So all history is really just stories, and there's so many stories that we have yet to hear, that we have yet to explore. And to me, there's something so compelling about finding that and trying to bring some of these things that have been in the shadows to light. And we've seen that with the recent, resurgence of, women's, telling women's stories in different periods, or like different parts of the, everything has been very, Eurocentric for a long time. We're seeing all these things come out. And I feel like that's what we need to be doing, is showing more perspectives and making us look at even the same series of events, like just looking at the Trojan War from more than the Greek side. I mean, there's just so much there. And I think that people can kind of process that through historical fiction in a way that maybe they wouldn't even if it was just called history. And I think there's value in that.
Yeah, and this is why we're co-writers, because I was going to say almost exactly the same thing. You can take one event, and if 100 different people witnessed it or experienced it, you have 100 novels. Like, you have 100 stories that are unique and fascinating. And I think that's why I keep coming back to historical fiction, because whatever the event is, it can be told from so many different angles, and they are all valid and all really, really interesting to learn from.
Yeah, it's important to say that they are all valid, and they all are their own story. That's great. Well, finally, Monica, what's the value of historical fiction for you?
Well, there's a saying, a Swahili saying, Kumba Nania, and that means creativity with purpose. And so creativity is where we tell the stories, but our stories have to have a purpose, a purpose to engage and enlighten and educate. And as Danielle said, there's so much of history that's out there that's just missing. And a way to, bring that to light is through a creative venue that has that purpose, that can drop those seeds of wisdom and allow people to grow and explore and come up with different ways on how they can move forward together.
Well, thank you again to everyone. It's been so much fun. Our next panel will not be until January, but I will publish that soon enough. I hope everyone has a great night. This has been so much fun. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Hi.